Hello YouTube, it's Frank B. Channel of various and sundry hobbies, and must excuse my absence. Been a rough spring and summer, but I've got a little time now in the shop. I'm mostly not a turner, mostly a flat cabinet man, and mostly make reproductions. They're not strict reproductions usually. They're sort of my interpretations of usually late George and Queen Anne pieces. My father-in-law and I bought a farm in Kentucky along with my wife's uncle. And my father-in-law is building a house and we have no furniture for it, for our hunting camp. So he asked me to put together a couple things, and my first project is a little trestle table. It's made from a woodcraft plan. I don't normally use purchased plans. I usually draw things to scale. But I had problems adapting a piece I wanted to make to the size that was required. So I've just gone ahead and bought this plan for $10 or $12. It's actually a nice plan, and it's allowed me to have scale drawings. You can actually download off the internet full-scale drawings, which can be cut out, pasted to plywood, and cut into templates like this. And not exactly purest fine carpentry, but not going to be snobbish about this. We'll just get the job done. Now I'm doing the piece out of walnut. I didn't want to show you the process of flattening boards and jointing boards. That's all been done many places in YouTube where you can see the proper way to do that. But I have gone to great lengths to try to get the boards flat and to glue them up. And now I'm in the process of just cleaning them up with a hand plane prior to cutting things to size. And I thought I'd just show a little bit of that, and then little snippets from here and there in the project. It's not really fine woodworking, but I thought you might like to see it. Thanks for tuning in. Please subscribe, by the way, and pass the word along to anyone else who has similar interests as I do. I sharpened all my planes before I started. This is a Lee Nielsen jack plane. I had a really nice set of just pre-World War II Baileys that I got from junk shops and tuned up, and some scoundrel nicked them on me when I moved, and the insurance company gave me this money, so I just went out and bought these instead. They're nice. They're not necessarily any better than a good plane which has been tuned up properly. I glued these boards together, and now I'm trying to take off the glue and get them pretty flat between the boards. I don't like to sand, and the more you can do, particularly on without sandpaper, the better. This is highly figured wood, and I have to be very careful, use a sharp plane, very light pass to avoid tear out, and some of this, frankly, is going to have to be scraped. I don't like to go over things like this with a belt sander. Belt sanders leave lots of divots, and I don't have a 48-inch drum sander for it, so this is all done the hard way. Try to take a diagonal pass. I have this between bench jobs on my bench. Diagonal pass, very light. The problem is you have grain directions going in different directions, and if you're not cautious, you'll get a great tear out. You can fix tear outs, just move wood with it. Sometimes with very figured wood, you're better off going a little bit more diagonally. You get a much nicer finish doing this than sanding it, because this cuts through the fibers very cleanly, whereas sanding just tears them. And a cut scrape surface really gives you a much nicer finish. Well, I've gone over it once pretty heavily, and then Try to fix the places I missed with a hand scraper. There are some rough spots in it. It's ready to start to sand now. Using softer woods without so much grain, it's easier to get a better job with just the scraper. There are probably places, to be truthful, I'd have to go over with maybe 100 grit paper. But it's not like doing the whole thing with an 80 grit or 60 grit orbital belt sander, which is really sort of a terrible thing to do to a nice piece of wood. I use a random orbit sander, and I'm pretty judicious with it. But this will save you a lot of work, a lot of time, get a nice finish. As you get more proficient with it, you should be able to really not have to sand with anything coarser than about 120 grit. It's easier on smaller jobs, you can be a little more thorough. But I thought you might like to see that, a little something different. Okay, I really didn't want to show you all this because it's really dull as dishwater, but I was able to get this template, full scale, glued it on some plywood, cut it out, and then put it on these pieces of wood. These are 4 pieces of walnut glued together because I didn't have 1.5" stock. And it may actually be a little more stable this way than if it was solid. But it's certainly solid. And I cut a couple tenons. These are 3/4 inch tenons, 1.5" long at the base, and about 3/4 by 3/4 at the top. And that's a very sturdy joint walnut. So my next job is to sand this up. I'll probably use spoke shaves first to try to clean that up, and I may show you that because if you haven't had a spoke shave in your hand, it's a wonderful tool, and it saves you a lot of power sanding, which makes a lot of dust and noise, and you get a much nicer finish with a spoke shave. So I'll show you that, and then the next step would be cutting tenons, cutting on mortises for this tenon to go into. Okay. This is a spoke shave. It's a wonderful tool. It's essentially a razor-like blade or plain blade held in a handle. You can get different configurations for the base. This one's rounded. This one's flat. The trick to using this is to sharpen them. They're a little hard to sharpen because they're small blades. Don't bother with micro bevels or anything like that. Lots of videos on how to sharpen these. But they're really wonderful for doing things like this, where you have a rough curved surface. You can push them or you can pull them. You try to go downhill with them, downhill with the grain. So if the grain's going this way, you want to cut this way, not this way. And sometimes it's hard to know which way the grain runs, especially in a wood like highly figured walnut like this is. And you can get grain reversals, and you just have to be sensitive about that. You don't have to get it absolutely perfect, so you can then go and scrape it. But remember, the craftsman always does each step the best he can with the tools he has. Otherwise, mistakes just multiply. And this really is a tremendous improvement and much more pleasant than just sitting there with a mechanical sander and sanding this. You'll spend a whole lot less time. This sort of works like a little hand plane. And you can fair these edges very nicely and very quickly.